I was knee-deep in mud when I heard the minivan pull up behind my property, which should have been my first warning that Thursday afternoon was about to go sideways. I had just purchased a brand new Caterpillar articulating loader 3 weeks prior, a beautiful piece of machinery that set me back nearly $200,000, and I was using it to clear the drainage ditch that ran along the back edge of my 5-acre property in Lakewood Ranch, Florida. The thing was a beast, capable of reaching places my old tractor never could, with an extending arm that could telescope out 28 feet and lift over 3 tons. I had been saving for this purchase for 4 years, running my landscaping business and doing side jobs every weekend to afford it. The sound of a car door slamming made me look up from the controls. Through the articulating loader's cab window, I spotted her immediately. Carol Patterson, the HOA president, marching across my back lawn in her usual uniform of khaki capris and a polo shirt with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA logo embroidered on the chest. She had that look on her face, the one that said she was about to make my life difficult just because she could. I shut down the loader and climbed out of the cab, my boots squelching in the soft ground. The Florida heat hit me like a wall, even though it was only March. Carol stopped about 10 feet away, her hands on her hips, squinting up at the massive yellow machine. "Chad Sanders," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that HOA board members seem to develop within weeks of being elected. "We need to talk about your new toy." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked toward her. "Carol, it is not a toy. It is professional equipment for my business. What can I do for you?" She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something. The HOA board had an emergency meeting last night. Several neighbors have complained about the noise and the sight of this industrial machinery on residential property, but that is not why I am here. "Okay," I said slowly, waiting for whatever ridiculous demand was coming next. "The community needs to use your loader," she announced, looking up from her phone with an expression that suggested she had just solved world hunger. "We have a major drainage project that needs to be done in the common areas, and hiring a contractor would cost the HOA nearly $15,000. Since you already own this equipment and you live here, the board voted that you should make it available for community use." I stared at her for a long moment, certain I had misheard. "You want me to lend you my $200,000 articulating loader," not lend, Carol corrected. "The HOA bylaws state that residents must contribute to the betterment of the community. This falls under that provision. We are not asking you to operate it yourself. We have already contacted someone who can run the machine. We just need you to provide access to it for approximately 2 weeks. The audacity of the request left me momentarily speechless. I had dealt with Carol and the HOA board plenty of times over the 5 years. I had lived in Meadowbrook Estates. They had cited me for having my work truck parked in my driveway overnight, complained about the height of my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall, and once tried to fine me because my house numbers were the wrong shade of black. But this was a new level of overreach. "Carol, that is not happening," I said firmly. "This is commercial equipment that I need for my business. It is insured under my business policy, and I am the only person authorized to operate it. Besides, letting someone else use it would violate the terms of my equipment loan." Her expression hardened. "The board anticipated you might be difficult about this. I have been authorized to inform you that if you refuse to cooperate, we will be forced to take action. Your equipment is visible from the street and several neighbors' properties, which constitutes a violation of our community standards regarding commercial vehicles and equipment on residential property." "My property is zoned for home business use," I countered. "I checked with the county before I bought this place. I have every right to keep my equipment here. The HOA covenants supersede county zoning in many cases, Carol replied smoothly. We can make this easy or difficult, Chad. The choice is yours. Allow the community to use your loader for 2 weeks, or face daily fines starting at $100 per day, increasing by $50 each week the violation continues. I felt my jaw clench. Get off my property, Carol. She smiled thinly. You have until Monday to reconsider. I will be in touch. With that, she turned and marched back to her minivan, leaving me standing there in disbelief. That evening, I called my business insurance agent, Marcus Chen, who I had been working with for 6 years. He picked up on the third ring. Chad, hey, what is up? I explained the situation with the HOA, their demand to use my articulating loader, and their threat of fines. Marcus listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Okay, so here is the thing, Marcus said when I finished. Your commercial equipment policy specifically covers you and any employees you have listed on the policy. It does not extend to random third parties operating your equipment. If you let someone else use that loader and they damage it, get hurt, or hurt someone else, your policy would not cover it. They would need their own insurance. That is what I thought, I said, relief washing over me. So I can tell the HOA to pound sand. From an insurance standpoint, absolutely. But Chad, document everything. Every conversation, every email, every threat they make. HOAs can be ruthless, and if they start hitting you with fines, you might need to lawyer up. Also, I would recommend getting something in writing from me stating that your insurance specifically excludes coverage for third-party operators. That might help if this goes to court. Can you send that over tonight? Give me an hour. True to his word, Marcus emailed me a letter on his company letterhead within the hour. The letter clearly stated that my commercial equipment insurance policy excluded coverage for any person not specifically listed on the policy operating my machinery, and that allowing the HOA or their contractor to use the equipment would void my coverage entirely. Furthermore, the letter noted that heavy equipment operation required specific licenses and certifications, and any accidents involving unlicensed operators could result in significant liability for the equipment owner. I printed 3 copies and put them in a folder, feeling somewhat better about the situation. Friday morning, I was working at a client's property in Bradenton, using the articulating loader to clear trees along their fence line when my phone rang. It was my wife, Hannah Emerson. We had been married for 3 years, and she had been dealing with the HOA's nonsense almost as long as I had. Chad, Carol just showed up at the house, Hannah said, her voice tight with frustration. She brought 2 other board members with her. They are walking around the yard taking pictures of the loader. I am 40 minutes away, I said, immediately starting to pack up my tools. Tell them they are trespassing and need to leave. I already did. Carol said they have the right to inspect properties for covenant violations. They are not listening to me. I could hear Carol's voice in the background, shrill and insistent. Just stay inside and lock the doors. I am on my way. The drive back to Lakewood Ranch took 35 minutes, which was 35 minutes of me gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks. When I pulled into my driveway, Carol's minivan was still there, along with a white sedan I recognized as belonging to Dennis Marsh, the HOA vice president, and a red SUV that probably belonged to the third board member. I found them in my backyard, Carol holding a tape measure while Dennis took photos with a tablet. The third person, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Fowler, who served as the HOA secretary, was making notes on a clipboard. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" I demanded, striding across the lawn. Carol looked up, completely unfazed, documenting violations, as is our right under the covenants. Your equipment exceeds the maximum height for structures visible from neighboring properties, which is 15 feet. This machine appears to be over 20 feet tall. It is 18 feet at the top of the cab, I said, and it is not a structure, it is a vehicle. The covenants define structures as any object that remains stationary on a property for more than 72 hours. Patricia chimed in, reading from her clipboard. Your loader has been parked in the same location for 3 weeks. Dennis kept taking pictures from every angle. We also have reports that you are running a commercial operation from your residence, which violates multiple covenant provisions. I have a home business license from the county, I said, pulling out my phone. I am calling the sheriff's department right now unless you leave my property in the next 60 seconds. Carol held up her hands in mock surrender. No need for dramatics, Chad. We have what we need. You will be receiving formal violation notices via certified mail. The fines will begin accruing on Monday as previously stated, and we are now adding additional violations for unauthorized commercial activity and unapproved structures. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Now. They left, but Carol paused at her minivan to call back. The board meeting is Monday night at 7. You are welcome to attend if you would like to discuss a resolution. I watched them drive away, then went inside to find Hannah standing at the kitchen window, her arms crossed. This is insane, she said. They cannot do this, can they? I do not know, I admitted, but I am finding out. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon on the phone with lawyers. The first 2 I called did not handle HOA disputes. The third, a woman named Jennifer Walsh who practiced in Sarasota, agreed to meet with me Monday morning over the weekend. I received the certified letters Carol had promised. 3 separate violation notices, each detailing a different supposed infraction and each carrying its own fine schedule. The total was $300 per day starting Monday, with increases every week. If the violations were not corrected within 30 days, the HOA reserved the right to place a lien on my property. Monday morning, I sat in Jennifer Walsh's office, watching her read through the violation notices and HOA covenants. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that I found reassuring. Okay, she said finally, setting down the papers. The good news is that most of these violations are questionable at best. The covenants do allow home businesses, and your county license should trump their restrictions. The structure definition is a stretch, since vehicles are explicitly excluded in another section of the covenants. However, the bad news is that fighting this is going to cost you time and money. How much money? I asked. If they push this and we have to take it to court, probably $15,000 to $20,000, maybe more. The HOA has deeper pockets than most individual homeowners because they can levy special assessments on the entire community to fund legal battles. It is one of the ways they bully people into compliance. I felt my stomach sink. So what do I do? Jennifer leaned back in her chair. A few options. 1. You comply with their demands. 2. You pay the fines and fight them in court later. 3. We try to negotiate a settlement. 4. You move. I know that last one sounds extreme, but I have seen people spend $50,000 fighting their HOA on principle, and even when they win, they are stuck living in a community that hates them. I am not moving, I said firmly, and I am definitely not giving them access to my loader. Someone will get killed. Then let us talk strategy, Jennifer said. First, I want you to get a risk assessment from your insurance company. If the HOA is demanding access to your equipment, they need to understand the liability implications. Second, I am going to send them a cease and desist letter regarding their trespassing on your property. Third, we are going to file a response to these violations citing the relevant sections of both the covenants and county ordinances that support your position. What about the board meeting tonight? Jennifer smiled. Definitely go. Record everything if Florida law allows it. Actually, Florida is a two-party consent state for recording, so you cannot secretly record, but you can take detailed notes. Ask questions. Make them explain their position in front of other homeowners. HOA boards often back down when they have to defend their actions publicly. That night, I walked into the Meadowbrook Estates clubhouse at 6:55. The community center was a modest building near the front entrance of our neighborhood, with a large meeting room, a small kitchen, and an outdoor pool. About 20 other residents were already there, sitting in folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where the board members sat. Carol was in the center seat, flanked by Dennis and Patricia. Two other board members I did not know well filled out the remaining seats. Carol had a gavel in front of her, which seemed ridiculously pretentious for a meeting of this size. I took a seat in the back row and pulled out a notepad. Several neighbors glanced at me, and I could hear whispered conversations. My situation had apparently become neighborhood gossip. Carol called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. They went through the usual boring agenda items first. Approval of last month's minutes, financial report, discussion of landscaping bids for the entrance. I waited, my pen tapping against my notepad. Finally, Carol reached the item I was waiting for. New business. As many of you are aware, the board has identified several serious covenant violations at 1247 Oakwood Drive, the residence of Chad Sanders. Chad is here tonight, so I will give him the opportunity to address the board after I outline the issues. She went through each violation in detail, making my articulating loader sound like an industrial nightmare that was destroying property values and disturbing the peace. According to Carol, I was running an illegal commercial operation, storing prohibited equipment, and refusing to cooperate with reasonable community requests. The board has voted to levy fines totaling $300 per day until these violations are corrected, Carol concluded. Additionally, we are exploring legal action to force compliance. Chad, would you like to respond? I stood up, very aware that everyone was looking at me. Yes, I would. First, I want to clarify something. The board did not just ask me to move my equipment. Carol Patterson came to my property and demanded that I allow the HOA to use my articulating loader for a community project. When I refused, these violation notices appeared. Murmurs rippled through the room. This was apparently news to most of the attendees. Carol's face reddened. That is not an accurate characterization. Really? I pulled out my phone and pulled up my notes from our first conversation. On Thursday, March 14th, you told me, and I quote, "The community needs to use your loader. The board voted that you should make it available for community use. You then threatened me with fines if I refused. The board has the authority to require residents to contribute to community projects," Carol said defensively, "by lending privately owned commercial equipment worth $200,000. I held up the letter from my insurance agent. I have documentation here from my business insurance provider stating that my policy specifically excludes coverage for third-party operators. If someone got hurt using my equipment, I would be personally liable. The HOA would also be liable. Has the board consulted with the HOA's insurance carrier about this?" The room had gone very quiet. Carol exchanged glances with Dennis, who looked uncomfortable. "That is not relevant to the violations," Carol said. "It is absolutely relevant," I countered. You are retaliating against me for refusing an unreasonable and potentially illegal demand. The violations you have cited are questionable at best. I have a valid home business license from Manatee County. My equipment is properly stored on my 5-acre property. Nothing I am doing violates any actual laws. A man in the front row raised his hand. Carol, is it true the board wants to use his equipment? That seems like a huge liability. The board discussed various options for completing necessary drainage work in the common areas, Carol said, her tone clipped. Using Chad's equipment was one option considered. However, the violations are separate from that discussion. They are not separate, I said. I received these violations within 24 hours of refusing your demand. This is retaliation, and I have an attorney who agrees. That got more murmurs. Patricia leaned over to whisper something to Carol, who looked increasingly flustered. Another resident, an older woman I recognized from the annual HOA barbecues, stood up. I would like to make a motion that the board table any fines against Mr. Sanders until we can get an independent legal opinion on whether these violations are valid. I second that motion, said another voice. Carol looked like she had just bitten into a lemon. The board has already voted on the fines, but the membership can overturn board decisions with a majority vote, the older woman said. It is in the bylaws, Carol. I helped write them. This was turning out better than I had hoped. Carol tried to argue procedural points, but the older woman, whose name I learned was Margaret Chen, was having none of it. She clearly knew the HOA bylaws inside and out, and she was not intimidated by Carol's attempts at parliamentary maneuvering. Eventually, Carol was forced to call for a vote. Of the 23 homeowners present, 18 voted to table the fines pending an independent legal review. It was not a complete victory, but it bought me time. After the meeting, several residents came up to thank me for standing up to the board. Margaret Chen introduced herself properly and told me that Carol had been pushing the boundaries of the board's authority for over a year. She thinks being HOA president makes her some kind of mayor, Margaret said. The board has gotten too comfortable making decisions without input from the membership. You did good tonight, young man. I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic, but I knew the fight was not over. Carol was not the type to back down easily. Tuesday morning, I got a call from Marcus Chen at my insurance company. Chad, I got a weird call yesterday from someone claiming to be the risk manager for your HOA. She was asking about coverage for heavy equipment. The HOA has a risk manager. I asked, surprised. Apparently. Her name is Linda something. She wanted to know if there was any way the HOA's general liability policy would cover residents operating personally owned heavy equipment for community projects. What did you tell her? I told her I could not discuss your policy with her, but speaking generally, commercial heavy equipment operation requires specialized insurance coverage that standard HOA policies do not include. She seemed pretty shocked. Did she say anything else? Yeah, she asked me to send her information about what it would cost to add that coverage. I ran some numbers. For an HOA to get coverage for occasional heavy equipment operation, they would be looking at probably $15,000 to $20,000 a year in additional premiums, plus they would need proof that operators are properly licensed and trained. I felt a grin spreading across my face. Can you send me an email summarizing that conversation? I might need it. Already done. Check your inbox. The email was there, detailing everything Marcus had told me. This was getting interesting. If the HOA's own risk manager was telling them they could not use my equipment, Carol's entire scheme was falling apart. Wednesday afternoon, I was working on a residential landscaping job in Lakewood when my phone rang. Unknown number, but it was local, so I answered. "Is this Chad Sanders?" A woman's voice, professional and brisk. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Linda Frederickson. I am the risk manager for the insurance company that covers Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. I got your number from the community directory. You have a few minutes to talk." "Sure," I said, setting down my tools and walking to my truck where it was quieter. "I understand there has been some dispute between you and the HOA board regarding your articulating loader," Linda said. "The board contacted me asking about adding coverage so that community volunteers could operate your equipment for a drainage project. I need you to understand that I have advised the board in the strongest possible terms that this is not feasible." "I appreciate you calling," I said carefully. The HOA's general liability policy specifically excludes coverage for operation of heavy equipment, defined as any machinery requiring a commercial operator's license or weighing over 10,000 pounds. Your articulating loader falls into that category. Even if the board were to purchase additional coverage, which would be prohibitively expensive, you as the equipment owner would still face enormous liability if something went wrong. "I tried to explain that to Carol Patterson," I said. Linda sighed. "Miss Patterson called me this morning demanding that I find a way to make this work. I had to explain to her 3 times that it is not possible. She seemed to think that because the HOA has insurance, anything community members do under HOA authorization is automatically covered. That is not how liability insurance works. So where does this leave things? I have sent a formal letter to the entire board explaining that any attempt to use your equipment, with or without your permission, would not be covered under the HOA's policy and would potentially expose both the HOA and you personally to catastrophic liability. I have also recommended that they hire a licensed contractor for their drainage project, which is what they should have done in the first place. "Thank you for that," I said sincerely. "Mr. Sanders, I have been doing this for 22 years. HOA boards sometimes get ideas that sound good in theory, but are nightmares from a risk management perspective. This is one of those situations. My letter should put an end to any demands that you share your equipment." After we hung up, I immediately forwarded the email from Marcus and my notes from the conversation with Linda to my attorney, Jennifer Walsh. She called me back within the hour. "This is excellent," Jennifer said. "The HOA's own risk manager has now told them they cannot do what they are demanding you do. If they continue to pursue fines against you, we have a very strong case for harassment and retaliation. So, what is the next step?" "I am going to draft a letter to the HOA board laying out your position, citing the insurance issues and demanding that they rescind all fines and violations. If they refuse, we will file a lawsuit. But honestly, I think they will back down. No HOA wants to go to court when their own risk manager has told them they are wrong." Thursday morning, I was replacing a fence post at a client's property when Carol Patterson showed up. I had no idea how she knew where I was working, which was unsettling. "Chad, we need to talk," she said, walking across the lawn like she owned the place. My client, an elderly man named Robert Fitzgerald, looked at Carol with confusion. "Can I help you?" "I am Carol Patterson, president of Meadowbrook Estates HOA," she announced, as if that meant something to someone who did not live there. "I need to speak with your contractor." "My contractor is busy," Robert said firmly. "You will have to wait or make an appointment." Carol ignored him and turned to me. "The board has received a very concerning letter from our risk manager. She seems to be under the impression that we are trying to commandeer your equipment, which is not accurate." "That is exactly what you are trying to do," I said, not stopping my work. "We simply asked if you would be willing to help the community," Carol said, her voice taking on a saccharine tone. "The risk manager has blown this out of proportion. However, the board is willing to compromise. Instead of the HOA using your equipment, what if we hired you to do the drainage work? We could pay you, say, $5,000 for 2 weeks of work." I straightened up and looked at her. "The contractor you were going to hire wanted $15,000, and you are offering me $5,000. You already own the equipment, so your costs are lower," Carol said. "It is a fair price." "No, it is not. My daily rate for that equipment is $1,200, plus operator fees. 2 weeks would be $12,000 minimum, and that is not counting overtime or material costs." Carol's expression hardened. "You are being unreasonable. This is your community. You should want to help." "I do want to help," I said, "at fair market rates. The HOA can hire me like any other client, and I will do the job professionally. But I am not giving anyone a discount, and I am definitely not letting random volunteers operate my equipment." "The board will consider your proposal," Carol said stiffly, "but the violations still stand. You are still operating a commercial business from a residential property." Robert Fitzgerald stepped forward. "Young lady, I do not know who you think you are, but you need to leave my property now. Chad is here doing work I hired him to do, and you are trespassing." Carol opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She shot me a venomous look and stalked back to her minivan. "Friend of yours?" Robert asked dryly after she left. "HOA president." "She is making my life difficult." Robert shook his head. "That is why I will never live in one of those communities. I fought in Vietnam to have freedom, not to have some busybody tell me what color I can paint my mailbox." I finished the job at Robert's house and headed home, wondering what Carol's next move would be. I did not have to wonder long. Friday morning, I found a cease and desist letter taped to my front door. It was from a law firm in Sarasota, representing the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. The letter demanded that I immediately remove my articulating loader from the property, cease all commercial operations, and pay the accumulated fines, which now totaled $1,500 for the week. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to Jennifer Walsh, then called her office. "I was expecting this," Jennifer said when she saw the letter. "They are trying to intimidate you. Do not pay anything. I am going to respond on your behalf and escalate our timeline for filing suit if necessary." "How long is this going to take?" I asked, feeling exhausted. "Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. But Chad, you are in the right here. We have documentation from your insurance agent, from the HOA's own risk manager, and from the county that what you are doing is legal and appropriate. They are grasping at straws." That afternoon, Jennifer filed a response to the HOA's letter and also sent a demand letter of our own, citing harassment, retaliation, and violations of my rights as a homeowner. She requested that the HOA immediately rescind all fines, issue a formal apology, and reimburse my legal fees, which were already approaching $5,000. The weekend passed quietly, which made me nervous. Carol was not the type to stay quiet unless she was planning something. Monday morning, I discovered what she had been planning. I woke up to find a camera crew in front of my house. Not news cameras, but what looked like a professional video production team. Carol was there too, along with Dennis and Patricia, giving an interview. I threw on clothes and rushed outside. "What the hell is going on?" A young man with a microphone turned to me. "Are you Chad Sanders? Who are you?" "I am Tyler Preston with Community Watch, a YouTube channel that covers HOA disputes and neighborhood issues. Miss Patterson contacted us about a situation in her community involving illegal commercial activity and uncooperative residents. Would you like to comment, so Carol was taking this public. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Yes, I would love to comment. Carol Patterson and the HOA board are harassing me because I refuse to let them use my privately owned commercial equipment. Their own risk manager and my insurance company have both said that what they are demanding is impossible and would expose everyone to massive liability. The HOA is now retaliating with bogus fines and violations. Tyler's eyes lit up. This was apparently more dramatic than he had expected. Can you elaborate on that? I spent the next 20 minutes laying out the entire situation on camera. Carol tried to interrupt several times, but Tyler kept her quiet, clearly interested in getting both sides of the story. When I pulled out the letters from my insurance agent and mentioned the HOA risk manager's assessment, I could see Carol's confidence faltering. So let me get this straight, Tyler said, summarizing. The HOA wanted to use your $200,000 articulating loader for free without proper insurance, and when you said no, they started hitting you with fines. That is exactly what happened, I confirmed. Tyler turned to Carol. Miss Patterson, is that accurate? That is a gross oversimplification, Carol sputtered. The HOA has the right to expect residents to contribute to the community. By lending out expensive commercial equipment, Tyler pressed. The violations are based on legitimate covenant concerns, Carol insisted, but she was clearly uncomfortable now. The interview went on for another 30 minutes, with Tyler asking increasingly pointed questions that Carol struggled to answer. Other neighbors started coming out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Several of them, including Margaret Chen, sided with me on camera. When Tyler finally wrapped up, he gave me his card. This is going to make a great video. I should have it posted by tomorrow. You might want to check the comments section because I have a feeling the community is going to be on your side. How many subscribers do you have? I asked. About 800,000. HOA drama is huge right now. Carol looked like she had swallowed a lemon. She and the other board members hurried to their cars and left without another word to me or the camera crew. Tuesday afternoon, Tyler's video went live. Within hours, it had thousands of views and hundreds of comments, almost all of them slamming the HOA and Carol specifically. People were digging into Meadowbrook Estates, looking up our bylaws, and finding other questionable decisions the board had made over the years. By Wednesday, the video had over 200,000 views. Local news stations started calling me for interviews. The Tampa Bay Times ran an article about HOA overreach, using my case as the primary example. Carol had succeeded in making this a public story, but not in the way she had intended. Thursday morning, I got a call from Dennis Marsh, the HOA vice president. He sounded tired. Chad, this is Dennis. I need to talk to you off the record. Okay, I said cautiously. The board met last night. Carol wanted to double down, but the rest of us voted to rescind the fines and violations. We are getting absolutely destroyed online and in the press. Several residents are threatening to recall the entire board. This has become a nightmare. I appreciate you calling to tell me, I said. There is more. 3 board members, including me, are resigning effective immediately. Patricia is staying on temporarily to help with the transition. Carol is refusing to step down, but I do not think she will last long. The membership is furious. What about the drainage project? I asked. Dennis sighed. We are hiring a licensed contractor like we should have done from the start. Carol was trying to save money and thought she could pressure you into helping for free. It was stupid and wrong, and I am sorry I went along with it initially. I appreciate that, Dennis. For what it is worth, if the HOA had approached you professionally from the beginning and offered a fair contract, would you have done the work? Probably, I admitted. I do this kind of work all the time. But not for $5,000, and definitely not by lending out my equipment to uninsured operators. That is what I thought. Carol made this so much harder than it needed to be. Anyway, you should receive a formal letter from the HOA attorney by the end of the week, withdrawing all violations and fines. We are also going to reimburse your legal fees up to $5,000. It is all we can do without calling a special assessment. That is fair, I said. Thank you for being reasonable. After Dennis hung up, I called Jennifer Walsh to update her. She was pleased with the outcome but cautioned me that it was not quite over until I had everything in writing. Carol could still try to cause problems, Jennifer warned. Some people double down on bad decisions rather than admit they were wrong. She was right to be concerned. Friday afternoon, Carol showed up at my house again, this time with a different lawyer, not the one the HOA had been using. She marched up to my door and rang the bell repeatedly until I answered. "Chad Sanders, you are being served," she announced, thrusting papers at me. I took them, confused. "What is this?" "A personal lawsuit," Carol said with satisfaction. "The HOA might have backed down, but I am not done. You have defamed me on that YouTube video and caused me personal and professional harm. I am suing you for $200,000 in damages." I looked at the papers. It was indeed a lawsuit, filed in Manatee County Circuit Court, alleging defamation, libel, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. "Everything I said in that interview was true and documented," I said. "We will let a jury decide that," Carol said. "You made me look like a fool in front of hundreds of thousands of people. You are going to pay for that." She left before I could respond. I immediately scanned the lawsuit and sent it to Jennifer, then called her. "This is not uncommon," Jennifer said after reviewing the documents. "When people lose in one forum, they sometimes try to reframe the dispute as a personal matter. The good news is that this lawsuit is frivolous. Florida has strong anti-SLAPP laws that protect people from lawsuits designed to silence criticism. The bad news is that you still have to respond to it, which means more legal fees. How much more? Probably another $5,000 to $10,000 to get it dismissed. But Chad, once we get this dismissed, we can file a motion for sanctions and attorney fees." Carol filed this in bad faith, and the court will not be happy about it. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer filed a motion to dismiss Carol's lawsuit under Florida's anti-SLAPP statute. We also filed a counterclaim for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. The legal maneuvering was tedious and expensive, but I had no choice but to see it through. Meanwhile, the situation at Meadowbrook Estates was deteriorating rapidly. Margaret Chen organized a petition to recall Carol from the board, and within a week, they had signatures from over 60% of the homeowners. A special meeting was called for early April. I attended that meeting, which was packed with angry residents. Carol tried to maintain control, but she was shouted down repeatedly. The membership voted overwhelmingly to remove her from the board, along with Patricia Fowler, who had supported Carol throughout the dispute. New board members were elected, including Margaret Chen as the new president. Her first act was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA, and to make it clear that the association would not interfere with legally permitted home businesses. In May, the court hearing on Carol's lawsuit took place. Jennifer had filed extensive documentation, including the YouTube video, the letters from insurance professionals, and testimonies from other homeowners. The judge was not impressed with Carol's case. "Miss Patterson," the judge said, peering over his glasses at Carol and her attorney. Mr. Sanders made statements of fact that were substantially true and matters of public concern regarding HOA governance. That is protected speech. Your lawsuit appears to be retaliation for his exercise of free speech rights. I am granting the motion to dismiss with prejudice." Carol's face went red. "But, Your Honor, he destroyed my reputation." "You destroyed your own reputation through your actions as HOA president," the judge replied curtly. "Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Sanders' request for attorney fees and sanctions. You will be required to pay his legal costs associated with defending this frivolous lawsuit. The court awards $22,000 in fees and $5,000 in sanctions. You understand?" Carol looked like she might argue further, but her attorney put a hand on her arm and whispered something. She nodded stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer shook my hand. "That went about as well as it could have. You should receive payment from Carol within 30 days. If she does not pay, we can garnish her wages or put a lien on her property." "I still cannot believe she pushed it this far," I said. "Some people cannot admit when they are wrong," Jennifer replied. "It is a character flaw that ends up costing them dearly." A month later, I received a check from Carol Patterson for $27,000. It covered all my legal fees and left me with a small profit, though the stress and time invested were not worth it. Still, it felt like justice. The Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, under Margaret Chen's leadership, became a model of reasonable governance. Margaret reached out to me personally and asked if I would be willing to bid on the drainage project at fair market rates. I submitted a proposal for $13,000, which the board accepted. I completed the drainage work over 2 weeks in June, using my articulating loader exactly as I had intended to use it all along, professionally, safely, and for fair compensation. Several board members came out to watch me work, marveling at what the machine could do. "We should have just hired you from the beginning," Margaret said one afternoon, watching the articulating arm extend to clear debris from a culvert. "Carol wasted thousands of dollars in legal fees and caused all this drama for nothing." "Lesson learned," I said. "The work went smoothly, and I finished ahead of schedule." The HOA paid me promptly, and Margaret even wrote a positive review of my business on several local websites, which brought me new clients. As for Carol Patterson, she moved out of Meadowbrook Estates in August. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she and her husband sold their house and relocated to a different community in Sarasota. I hoped, for the sake of her new neighbors, that she had learned something from the experience, though I doubted it. Tyler Preston, the YouTube journalist, did a follow-up video on my case after the lawsuit was dismissed. That video got even more views than the first one, and I received messages from people all over the country who had dealt with similar HOA nightmares. Some of their stories made mine look tame by comparison. The experience taught me several valuable lessons. First, documentation is everything. Every email, every letter, every conversation I documented ended up being crucial in defending myself. Second, knowing your rights and the limits of an HOA's authority can save you from being bullied into compliance with unreasonable demands. Third, having good insurance and understanding what it does and does not cover is critical when dealing with expensive equipment and potential liability. But the most important lesson was about standing up for yourself. It would have been easier in some ways to just give in to Carol's initial demand, or to sell the property and move somewhere without an HOA. But giving in to unreasonable demands just encourages more unreasonable demands. By standing firm, documenting everything, and being willing to fight when necessary, I not only protected myself, but also helped reform an HOA that had been overstepping its authority for years. My business thrived after the publicity. Apparently, being the guy who stood up to an abusive HOA, and one made me popular with clients who valued independence and fairness. I hired 2 additional employees and purchased a second piece of equipment, a compact excavator that complemented the articulating loader perfectly. Hannah and I discussed whether we should move away from Meadowbrook Estates, but ultimately decided to stay. Under the new board leadership, the community became a pleasant place to live. They focused on actual community maintenance and safety issues, rather than harassing homeowners over petty violations. I kept my articulating loader parked in the same spot on my property where it had always been, a visible reminder of the whole saga. Sometimes, when I climbed into the cab to head out to a job, I thought about how close I had come to giving in to Carol's demands, and how different things might have turned out. In November, the HOA held their annual meeting, and Margaret Chen was re-elected as president by acclamation. During her report, she specifically mentioned the reforms the board had implemented, including new guidelines for how violations would be handled, and a requirement that the board consult with the community risk manager before making any decisions involving liability or insurance issues. "We learned some hard lessons this year," Margaret said, "but I think we are a stronger community because of it. HOAs exist to serve the homeowners, not the other way around. I hope everyone remembers that going forward." There was strong applause, and several people glanced at me with knowing smiles. I had become something of a folk hero in Meadowbrook Estates, the guy who had stood up to the board and forced them to change. As the year came to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened. What started as a simple refusal to lend out my equipment had snowballed into a legal battle, a media circus, and ultimately a complete restructuring of how the HOA operated. It was exhausting and expensive, but it was worth it. My articulating loader continued to serve me well, helping me build my business and take on larger commercial projects. Every time I used it, I was reminded of why I had fought so hard to protect it. This was not just a piece of equipment. It represented years of hard work, sacrifice, and investment in my future. No HOA board member, no matter how entitled or aggressive, had the right to take that away from me or to put me at risk by demanding I share it without proper protections in place. The story spread through online HOA forums and property rights groups. I gave several interviews to podcasts and news outlets about HOA overreach and homeowner rights. I was not looking to become a public figure, but if my experience could help other people understand their rights and stand up to unreasonable demands, then some good came from the whole ordeal. In January of the following year, I received an unexpected letter from the Florida legislature. A state representative named Robert Simmons had introduced a bill to reform HOA governance in Florida, inspired in part by cases like mine. The bill would require HOAs to carry specific insurance for any activities involving heavy equipment or significant liability, would limit their ability to impose fines without due process, and would strengthen homeowner rights to operate legal home businesses. Representative Simmons invited me to testify before the committee considering the bill. I took a day off work and drove to Tallahassee, where I spent 3 hours answering questions from legislators about my experience. Several other homeowners also testified about their own HOA nightmares, painting a picture of an industry that desperately needed reform. The bill passed the committee and eventually became law, though in a somewhat watered-down form after HOA lobbying groups got involved. Still, it was progress, and I felt proud to have played a small part in it. Back home, life settled into a comfortable routine. My business continued to grow. Hannah and I started planning to expand our house, and the HOA stayed out of my way. Margaret Chen and I became friends, and I even joined the architectural review committee, helping to evaluate requests from other homeowners who wanted to make changes to their properties. The irony was not lost on me. A year earlier, I had been fighting the HOA with everything I had. Now I was part of the process, helping to make sure future decisions were fair and reasonable. It was a strange turn of events, but it felt right. The articulating loader remained the crown jewel of my equipment fleet. I took excellent care of it, performing regular maintenance and keeping it in pristine condition. It had become something of a legend in local construction and landscaping circles, not just for its capabilities, but for the story behind it. Sometimes, when I was working on a particularly challenging job, using the loader's articulating arm to reach an impossible spot or lift something heavy, I would think about Carol Patterson and wonder if she ever realized how wrong she had been. Probably not. People like that rarely do. But it did not matter anymore. I had won, not just the legal battles but the larger fight for respect and fair treatment. My business was thriving, my marriage was strong, and I lived in a community that had learned to balance authority with accountability. The story of the HOA that demanded I share my articulating loader became a cautionary tale, shared in homeowner forums and HOA board training sessions as an example of what not to do. It was cited in legal articles about homeowner rights and HOA limitations. And most importantly, it gave courage to other people facing similar battles to stand up for themselves and not back down in the face of unreasonable demands. Looking back, I would not change anything about how I handled the situation. It was stressful and expensive, but I protected my business, my property rights, and my dignity. I proved that homeowners do not have to be victims of overzealous HOA boards, that documentation and legal knowledge are powerful tools, and that sometimes the right thing to do is to fight back, even when it seems easier to just give in. My articulating loader sits in my backyard right now, gleaming yellow in the Florida sunshine, ready for tomorrow's job. It is more than just a machine to me. It is a symbol of independence, hard work, and the importance of standing up for what is right. And every time I climb into that cab and fire up the engine, I am reminded that I earned the right to use it on my own terms, without interference from anyone who thinks they have power over me simply because they sit on an HOA board. That is worth more than any amount of money, any amount of convenience, or any amount of peace and quiet that comes from backing down. Freedom and respect are worth fighting for, and I am glad I did.